Watchers call. Whispers from the eternal void.
I recorded the first impossibility at exactly 8:47:33 by my personal chronometer, then watched in growing horror as every other timepiece in the expedition contradicted me with mathematical precision. Tech Adept Vex 7's cogitator displayed 14:01:09. Guardsman Voss's standard issue chrono read 02:11:17. The field auspex showed 23:59:44. 847 years of temporal variance across identical imperial instruments, yet each functioned with mechanical perfection according to its individual flow. I am Magos Explorator Thane Calix, seconded from the lathes to Ordo Xenos for xenoarchaeological investigation, and this violation of causality broke every rule of reality I had spent decades learning to trust. Caris Nul stretched before us like a necropolis, wearing its death as ornament. Black glass planes reflected a sky the color of oxidized iron, while half-buried pylons jutted from obsidian grit like accusatory fingers pointing toward some buried heart. The tomb's entrance portal bore traditional Necron architecture, monolithic arch, trilateral facets, void black living metal. But the hieroglyphs scrolling across its lintel moved with countdown precision, ticking backward toward zero with the measured grace of a funeral march. My linguistic cogitators translated the descending sequence as temporal measurement, not standard imperial hours, but something older, more fundamental. 72 units remained before null state, and despite the chronometer chaos plaguing our equipment, every timepiece agreed on this interval. 72 hours until convergence, 72 hours until Battlefleet Obscurus would exercise viral bombardment authorization and reduce this world to sterile ash. Environmental conditions violated atmospheric physics with mathematical regularity. Temperature fluctuated between Arctic cold and furnace heat in precisely timed cycles. 9 seconds of frost that crystallized moisture on my augmetic lenses, followed by 9 seconds of thermal radiation that sublimed ice directly to vapor without liquid transition. The frost formed geometric patterns across living metal surfaces, intricate fractals that mirrored no known Necron symbology, yet whispered of alien intelligence, finding beauty in mathematical precision. Shadows defied illumination physics with stubborn consistency. Every triangular shadow, regardless of our lumen positioning, pointed invariably toward the tomb's heart. The phenomenon persisted across multiple light sources, creating a visual anchor in a landscape determined to defy consistency. This constant, unnerving alignment felt less like physics and more like directive, a silent, ceaseless invitation drawing us inward. A subsonic pulse emanated from the catacombs' depths at exactly 27 hertz, the precise frequency known to disrupt human neural function through resonant interference with brainwave patterns. The sound existed below conscious perception, yet registered in my augmetic audio, processes as rhythmic pressure, attempting to entrain biological systems to its mechanical cadence. 27 beats, pause, 27 beats, pause. The number repeated with obsessive precision throughout our preliminary survey data. Time bleeds backward, whispered through our Vox network on frequencies that should carry only machine-spirit communications. No transmission source identified, no authorization codes. The phrase repeated every 27 minutes with identical inflection, spoken in high Gothic through vocal patterns, my analysis engines refused to classify as human or xenos. The temporal distortions propagated outward from the tomb entrance at measured velocity, 1 kilometer per hour of expanding chronological instability. Imperial Guard positions at the perimeter reported equipment malfunction consistent with our chronometer variants. Laser guns discharged before triggers were pulled. Voxcasters received transmissions from units not yet deployed. Medici servitors diagnosed wounds before injuries occurred. Expedition classification update, I transmitted across command frequencies, my voice maintaining clinical precision despite growing unease. Anomaly designation, Chronarch pattern 27-9-3. Temporal hazard confirmed. Viral sterilization authorized in 72 standard across all correlated time streams. The portal's countdown continued its impossible descent, hieroglyphs shifting with mechanical certainty toward convergence. My threat assessment protocols classified this as requiring immediate escalation. A Necron Tomb exhibiting temporal manipulation technology that exceeded theoretical parameters. Standard containment procedures proved inadequate when causality itself became compromised. All units initiate entry protocols, I commanded, mechadendrite extending to interface with expedition cogitators. Maintain chronometer synchronization through manual verification. Report any temporal displacement phenomena immediately. The Omnissiah preserve our pattern. Scutari Rangers raised galvanic rifles with synchronized precision, their augmetic systems filtering the 27 Hz interference through trained discipline. Vex 7 activated Auspex arrays, scanning for energy signatures that might explain the temporal chaos. The Guard maintained perimeter positions, their faces grim with the particular fatalism of soldiers facing incomprehensible threats. Frost bloomed across my armor in triangular tessellations as the 9-second thermal cycle reached its nadir. The patterns hurt to perceive directly, geometric arrangements that suggested meaning while refusing interpretation. Every triangle pointed inward, with the same stubborn certainty as the shadows, creating a visual rhythm that matched the subsonic pulse thrumming through Tombstone. I raised my hand to signal advance, feeling the countdown's weight in my augmetic bones. 71 hours, 59 minutes, 37 seconds until viral bombardment. 71 hours until whatever slept in Karis Null's heart completed its temporal feast. The shadows stretched toward the portal with geometric inevitability, and my chronometer continued its impossible count through years I had never lived. Static burst across my personal Vox channel, cutting through ambient tomb harmonics with electromagnetic violence. My own voice emerged from the interference, aged, desperate, carrying exhaustion and terror I had never experienced. The transmission originated from 27 hours in the future, according to quantum analysis, yet spoke with absolute knowledge of our present situation. The Chronarch is already awake, my future self warned through temporal impossibility. We fed it our time. We crossed the portal threshold into corridors where living metal wept temporal distortion like luminous oil, each droplet carrying fragments of causality that pooled in geometric patterns across necrodermis floors. The 9-second thermal cycle persisted with mechanical precision, Arctic frost crystallizing in triangular tessellations across obsidian surfaces, followed by furnace heat that sublimed ice directly to vapor without liquid transition. My Auspex registered the 27 Hz pulse as visible pressure waves crawling along the ceiling like slow serpents, while triangular shadows maintained their stubborn orientation toward the tomb's heart, regardless of our lumen positioning. Temporal variance confirmed across all structural elements, Tech Adept Vex 7 reported, his augmetic arrays painting impossible readings across my visor display. Walls exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously. Segment analysis indicates overlapping phases, foundation construction circa pre-biotransference, oxidation consistent with millennia of neglect, and post-restoration polish bearing nanoscopic tool marks from future applicators. All three states maintain quantum coherence through unknown mechanism. The tomb's architecture defied consistent observation through systematic violation of causality. I watched pristine Necron masonry flicker between current decay and future restoration. The same surfaces displaying fresh-carved hieroglyphs, weathered erosion, and renewed perfection in impossible superposition. My optical augmetics struggled against the temporal flux, each blink revealing different construction phases, spanning eons in translucent overlay. Environmental hazards manifested as what my threat assessment protocols classified as time bleeds, pockets of chronological distortion that caused equipment malfunction through temporal displacement. A guardsman stumbled into one such anomaly, his seconds stretching into subjective hours, while his body moved with agonizing slowness. We extracted him with mechadendrite precision, his face etched with exhaustion from days lived in moments, uniform aged and frayed, as if from decades of wear. Conversely, micro-pockets of compressed time caused servo motors to seize and circuits to burn out in microseconds, my auspex flickering between past scans, future readings, and present data in temporal cacophony. The 27 Hz pulse intensified with each forward meter, creating harmonic resonance in augmetic implants that required manual recalibration every 9 minutes. My secondary cardiac regulator stuttered against subsonic interference, forcing conscious override of autonomic functions, while neural buffers crashed, attempting to process contradictory sensory input. The discipline was excruciating, like pulling thoughts away from hypnotic drumbeat, but necessary to prevent temporal distortions from seizing cognitive control. Necron scarabs scuttled through passages with movements that violated causality through systematic reversal. I observed mechanical insects emerge from destruction, fragments reassembling into whole constructs that moved backward through previous paths before vanishing into temporal origin points. Their behavior suggested existence in reverse chronological order, effect preceding cause in direct contradiction to universal law. We destroyed a chain of them as they crested a girder, their shattered shells scattering like dull jewels, only to watch the same scarabs scurry into the kill zone backward minutes later, reconstituting beneath our eyes before continuing to points where we had first observed them. Hieroglyphs carved into wall surfaces shifted meaning when observed directly, linguistic matrices rearranging to describe events that had not yet occurred. My translation's cogitators struggled with text that recounted our expedition's failure in past tense while existing in our present. The glyphs spoke of temporal energy harvested for purposes beyond imperial comprehension, of expedition members aged to dust, of transformation into something beyond human understanding. Names arranged in neat funerary columns, routes of retreat circling into cul-de-sacs that would not exist until we chose them. Time bleeds backward, whispered through our Vox network on frequencies reserved for machine spirit communications, now emanating from speakers embedded in walls that should contain only sacred protocols. The phrase carried mocking cadence, as if the tomb itself repeated our terrified realizations with predatory amusement. We discovered Skitari Ranger Theta 9 in an alcove that should have been empty according to deployment records. His augmetic frame bore wounds from weapons that had not yet fired, clean perforations consistent with energy signatures my scanners could not identify. The damage patterns suggested combat with forces possessing technology, beyond current Imperial classification. Yet his chronometer indicated wounds inflicted 27 minutes in the future. A perfect cylinder of absence pierced his helmet, entry and exit wounds, bearing propellant residue flagged with my own requisition codes, though my pistol remained fully loaded. Emergency reclassification filed. I transmitted, overriding expedition traffic with command authority. Anomaly designation revised. Chronarch pattern 27-9-3. Elevated threat classification. Temporal manipulation technology, exceeding theoretical parameters. The tomb is not merely affected by time. It is time itself. Environmental distortion intensified with each meter of penetration, reality becoming increasingly fluid around fixed points of Necron architecture. The temporal efflux blurred observation itself, making corridors seem to stretch and contract in subjective perception, while frost patterns grew more complex, forming fractal geometries that whispered of mathematical relationships existing outside standard dimensional frameworks. External perimeter reports distortion ring expansion, came the guard Vox transmission, thin with distance and interference. 9 kilometers from portal. Auspex shows Vox chatter from temporal variants overlaying present communications. Medicaid diagnostics indicate future casualties from engagements not yet initiated. Maintain perimeter discipline, I ordered, voice tight with controlled analysis. Anchor to real tasks, inventory protocols, litanies of function. Do not acknowledge communications from sources that know information beyond current deployment parameters. The corridor terminated at a sealed blast door, bearing Imperial Aquila markings that seemed temporally displaced, too weathered for current deployment, yet too pristine for ancient construction. Hazard text beneath chevron patterns changed while observed. Warning shifting to archaic Low Gothic, then Necrontier triangular script meaning barrier, then vanishing entirely. As we approached, the portal cycled open with hydraulic precision, revealing a figure that made my threat assessment protocols crash with classification errors. Guardsman Voss stood in the chamber beyond, but his uniform bore battle honors from campaigns existing only in theoretical deployment schedules. The Cadian Gate commemoration, Sabbat Worlds Crusade citations, Macarian Cross for actions decades ahead, according to Imperial chronology. His face carried exhaustion from wars not yet fought, eyes reflecting horrors from battlefields that remained unborn. His chronometer, visible through transparent casing, counted backward through negative time, while displaying dates that violated every principle of temporal mechanics I had studied during ordination. Magos, Voss spoke with flat certainty of someone who had witnessed impossible things become routine, his voice carrying grit that sounded like sand blown through years. Don't let them count you. There's a thing down here that eats tomorrow. Voss stood motionless in the chamber beyond, his uniform bearing battle honors from campaigns that existed only in theoretical deployment schedules, commendations for actions decades in the future according to imperial chronology. His face carried exhaustion from wars not yet fought, eyes reflecting horrors from battlefields that remained unborn. When he spoke, his voice carried the measured cadence of someone who had witnessed impossible things become routine through repetitive experience across multiple timeline variants. "I am from 27 hours ahead in your timeline, Magos," he explained, his chronometer counting backward through negative values that violated every principle of temporal mechanics I had studied during ordination. The expedition failed catastrophically. The Chronarch harvested our time to power resurrection protocols that restore not just Necron bodies, but their pre-biotransference consciousness, the Necron tier, as they were before mechanical conversion. His account unfolded with clinical precision, despite obvious psychological trauma from temporal displacement. The Chronarch, a Necron overlord, possessing unprecedented mastery over chronological manipulation, had been conducting systematic harvesting of temporal essence from living beings across multiple probability matrices. Each stolen hour, minute, second accumulated in vast chronometer mechanisms throughout the tomb, powering resurrection engines designed to reverse 65 million years of biotransference through harvested time rather than conventional energy sources. Environmental horror escalated around us as Voss spoke, reality responding to his temporal contamination with increasing instability. Gravity began flowing backward in 9-second pulses, synchronized to the thermal cycles, lifting debris toward the ceiling with gentle inevitability, before snapping back with crushing force. My mag boots struggled against the reversals, servos whining as they attempted to maintain contact with surfaces that periodically rejected planetary attraction. The phenomenon created disorientation that made tactical movement treacherous, equipment floating upward like ascending prayers before crashing down with violence that spoke of physics remembering its fundamental purpose. The air tasted of ozone and copper, metallic particles suspended in atmosphere that carried sounds from conversations occurring in different temporal states. My audio processors registered overlapping dialogue, past discussions about deployment parameters, future screams from battles not yet fought, present whispers of the 27 Hz pulse that continued its subsonic assault on neural function. The cacophony created auditory hallucinations where orders from different timeline variants competed for attention, forcing conscious effort to distinguish present communication from temporal echoes. Walls throughout the corridor displayed holographic recordings of our deaths in multiple timeline variants, ghostly projections showing expedition members dying in ways that defied current tactical parameters. I watched myself fall to weapons that did not exist in Imperial arsenals, saw Vex 7 consumed by temporal energy that aged him to dust in seconds, observed guardsmen fighting enemies that phased between different time periods with predatory grace. The recordings played simultaneously, creating overlapping narratives of failure that suggested systematic analysis of our tactical responses across probability matrices. Voss bore biomechanical stigmata that made my threat assessment protocols stutter with classification errors. Living metal grew beneath his skin in fractal patterns that pulsed with the 27 Hz frequency. creating geometric tattoos that moved with organic fluidity while maintaining metallic precision. The growths followed neural pathways, visible through translucent skin, creating circuit patterns that interfaced directly with his nervous system through mechanisms beyond current Imperial understanding. The stigmata allow interface with Necron temporal technology, he explained, raising his arm to display the living metal threading through muscle and bone. The chronarch marks its test subjects for repeated harvesting across timeline variants. Each iteration teaches it more about human temporal essence, refining extraction protocols for maximum efficiency through systematic experimentation. His knowledge proved accurate through systematic demonstration. He guided us past temporal traps, where Lichguard phased in from different time periods, their Gorse weaponry firing rounds that struck targets before discharge occurred. The warriors existed in temporal flux, appearing as probability clouds that solidified into killing machines when observation collapsed their quantum states. Voss anticipated their manifestation points with supernatural precision, directing our movement through safe corridors, while energy beams carved reality around our positions. Gauss fire operates through temporal displacement, he transmitted, as we advanced through chronologically unstable passages. The rounds exist in multiple time streams simultaneously, hitting targets in past, present, and future iterations. Standard evasion protocols prove inadequate against weapons that strike before being fired. Environmental distortion intensified with each meter of penetration, the tomb's architecture becoming increasingly fluid around fixed points of Necron construction. Temperature fluctuations created thermal mirages that showed different structural configurations, past construction phases, current decay, future restoration, all existing in translucent overlay that hurt to perceive directly. The 27 Hz pulse grew stronger, creating harmonic resonance in augmetic implants that required constant manual recalibration to prevent systematic failure. Triangular shadows maintained their orientation toward the tomb's heart with stubborn consistency, creating visual anchors in a landscape determined to defy observation. Frost patterns grew more complex with each thermal cycle, forming fractal geometries that whispered of mathematical relationships existing outside standard dimensional frameworks. The patterns seemed to respond to our presence, growing more intricate when observed directly, as if the tomb itself appreciated an audience for its temporal artistry. Time bleeds backward, echoed through speakers embedded in walls that should contain only machine spirit communications, the phrase now carrying multiple inflections as different timeline variants experienced identical revelations. The repetition suggested accumulated warnings across probability matrices, their temporal layers creating harmonic interference that made reality stutter around frequency edges. We reached a sealed chamber bearing hazard markings in languages that had not yet been invented, warning symbols that changed meaning when observed directly. The portal cycled open with hydraulic precision, revealing 27 stasis pods arranged in perfect geometric configuration. Each contained a version of Voss from different failed timeline variants, their faces bearing exhaustion from different iterations of the same impossible mission. The newest pod began opening with mechanical certainty, revealing another Voss variant whose temporal contamination had progressed beyond recognition. The stasis chamber revealed its horrific purpose through 27 crystalline pods arranged in perfect geometric configuration, each containing a guardsman Voss variant from different failed timeline iterations. Their faces bore identical exhaustion from impossible missions repeated across probability matrices, temporal contamination progressing through systematic stages that made my threat assessment protocols stutter with classification errors. The newest pod completed its opening cycle with hydraulic precision, exhaling breath that tasted of ozone and copper, while revealing a figure whose biomechanical stigmata had progressed beyond human recognition. My auspex painted the chamber's true function in stark, tactical overlays, chronosiphon technology embedded throughout the crystalline structures, Necron devices designed to drain temporal essence from living beings with surgical precision. Each pod contained monitoring equipment that tracked chronological harvesting across multiple extraction cycles, data streams showing systematic refinement of temporal theft protocols through repetitive experimentation. The process left subjects as desiccated husks aged centuries in seconds, while their stolen time fed resurrection engines throughout the tomb complex. The Chronarch learns through iteration, the original Voss explained, his voice carrying grit from years blown through temporal displacement. Each timeline variant provides data about human temporal essence, how consciousness processes non-linear time, how biological systems respond to chronological manipulation, how much duration can be harvested before complete neural collapse occurs. Environmental horror escalated with mathematical precision as the chamber's systems responded to our presence. Temperature drops created frost patterns in spiraling geometries across pod surfaces, crystalline formations that mapped neural pathways, visible through translucent skin of the contained variants. The patterns grew more complex with each thermal cycle, forming mathematical relationships that suggested the frost itself served as data storage medium for harvesting protocols refined across timeline iterations. The 27 Hz pulse synchronized with human heartbeats through harmonic resonance that caused cardiac arrhythmia in unaugmented personnel. My secondary cardiac regulator struggled against subsonic interference, forcing conscious override of autonomic functions, while guardsmen clutched chests as their hearts skipped beats. The pulse attempted to entrain biological rhythms to its mechanical cadence with increasing success. Temporal contamination affecting circulatory systems through frequencies designed to disrupt human neural function. Shadows throughout the chamber moved independently of light sources, displaying actions from different time streams in ghostly overlay that hurt to perceive directly. Triangular darkness showed expedition members executing maneuvers from timeline variants, where tactical parameters differed from current deployment, maintaining stubborn orientation toward the tomb's heart, while simultaneously depicting past failures and future deaths in visual narrative of systematic analysis conducted across probability matrices. The awakening Voss variant stirred with mechanical precision, his eyes flickering open to reveal pupils that had learned to focus on multiple temporal states simultaneously. When he spoke, his voice carried overlapping temporal echoes, words from past and future conversations woven into present grammar that made translation protocols crash, attempting to parse contradictory linguistic data. Harvesting complete. Iteration 27. the variant whispered through vocal apparatus partially converted to mechanical function. "We died here again. We will die here again. We are dying here now." The words braided together until they became harmonic interference that rode the pulse and attempted to settle into my chest like temporal metronome. Biomechanical corruption manifested as living metal scarabs emerged from ventilation systems, their forms blasphemous fusions of Necron construction and organic parasite. The mechanical insects moved with purpose that suggested ritual precision, converging on exposed flesh with surgical care. They burrowed into tissue without tearing, insinuating themselves between cells with capillary grace, while their carapaces softened and reconstituted beneath skin as fractal lattice. Living circuits drawn through nerves with draftsman accuracy. "Interface protocols," Vex 7 transmitted, his augmetic arrays clicking in Necron tire cadence between syllables. "The Chronarch borrows our time sense through these grafts to experience linearity. It requires consciousness that perceives duration as sequential flow rather than quantum superposition. Military discipline began fragmenting as guardsmen experienced temporal displacement effects that violated command structure through chronological confusion. Soldiers remembered orders not yet given, executing maneuvers from different timeline variants, while attempting to maintain present tactical coherence. Squad formations dissolved into chaos as troops responded to commands from future iterations, their movements becoming increasingly erratic as temporal contamination affected cognitive function through systematic neural interference. "Maintain present tense discipline," I commanded across Squad Vox, my voice tight with controlled analysis. "Anchor to current deployment parameters. Ignore communications from sources that possess a knowledge beyond present mission briefing. Environmental distortion intensified as walls displayed holographic recordings of harvesting procedures conducted across multiple timeline variants. The projections showed systematic extraction of temporal essence from expedition members, their stolen hours accumulating in vast chronometer mechanisms throughout the tomb complex, while hieroglyphs shifted meaning when observed directly, describing temporal energy requirements for resurrection protocols that would restore Necron consciousness to pre-biotransference states. "Time bleeds backward," whispered through speakers embedded in pod housings, the phrase now carrying accumulated weight from 27 timeline iterations. Each repetition layered harmonic interference that made reality stutter around frequency edges, temporal echoes creating resonance patterns that threatened to collapse present observation into probability cloud. The chamber's central altar began rising from floor plates with mechanical certainty, its obsidian surface bearing chronometer mechanisms that counted toward convergence through impossible mathematics. Green radiance crawled through veins hidden in living stone, lines resolving into three-dimensional projection that rotated like thought learning its edges. A holographic map of the tomb's core unfolded in tiers, labyrinthine passages, arterial corridors, the chambered heart, each layer annotated with chronometric script that translated as temporal coordinates rather than spatial locations. Around the central void hung 27 massive chronometer mechanisms like planets in patient orbits, each counting toward shared zero, that hammered at the back of my teeth in sympathetic rhythm. Their faces collected luminous torrents that looked like water until consciousness decided water could be years, temporal energy flowing in visible streams toward the nexus where all lines converged. At the map's heart, in the temporal nexus where shadows pointed and the pulse began, something vast stirred in its chronological sleep and pressed against the membrane of now with ancient purpose that made the hologram flicker with anticipation. Following the holographic guidance, we descended through passages that existed in temporal flux, reality shimmering like heat distortion over surfaces that refused singular existence. The original Voss led with preternatural certainty, his biomechanical stigmata pulsing in harmony with the 27 Hz frequency that now thrummed through tombstone like a mechanical heartbeat. His uniform bore battle honors from campaigns decades in the future, fabric aged by wars not yet fought, while his chronometer counted backward through negative time with stubborn precision. My Auspex painted impossible architecture across visor displays, chambers that were simultaneously under construction, fully functional, and in ruins, with all three states maintaining equal quantum reality through mechanisms beyond imperial understanding. Pristine Necron masonry flickered between fresh-carved perfection and millennia of decay, while displaying future restoration in translucent overlay that made observation feel like drowning in possibility. The effect created constant assault on optical augmetics, forcing pattern recognition protocols to cycle through infinite regress of chronological states. The 27 Hz pulse intensified with each meter of penetration toward the nexus heart, creating harmonic resonance in augmetic systems that caused temporal echoes to bleed through standard sensor arrays. My Auspex displayed data from past scans overlaid on present readings, while simultaneously showing future sensor sweeps that had not yet occurred, creating informational cacophony that made threat assessment protocols crash, attempting to pass contradictory input streams. Past, present, and future tactical data wove together until observation itself became temporal archaeology. Investigation revealed the chronarch's true purpose through systematic analysis of hieroglyphic sequences that shifted meaning when observed directly. Not conquest, but temporal archaeology, excavating consciousness from the deep past to restore the Necron tier as they were before biotransference corrupted them into mechanical shells. The tomb served as massive chronometer mechanism, designed to harvest temporal essence from living beings, using their stolen time to power resurrection protocols that would reverse 65 million years of mechanical existence through accumulated duration rather than conventional energy sources. Environmental horror escalated with mathematical precision as air began shimmering with chronosynaptic energy, microscopic particles of liquid time that made breathing feel like drowning in temporal distortion. Each inhalation carried weight of years, minutes, seconds stolen from across the galaxy and concentrated into atmosphere that attempted to reprogram respiratory systems through chronological contamination. My filtration system struggled against temporal particles that existed in multiple time states simultaneously, creating sensation of suffocations while maintaining adequate oxygen levels through impossible paradox. Walls wept, temporal distortion that aged metal to rust while simultaneously restoring it to pristine condition, creating visual feedback loops where decay and restoration marched side by side, like rival processions sharing unholy hymn. Temperature fluctuations continued their 9-second cycles, frost forming in increasingly complex geometric patterns that mapped neural pathways, while triangular shadows maintained stubborn orientation toward the Nexus heart, regardless of lumen positioning. Tech Adept Vex 7 began showing pronounced signs of temporal contamination that made my threat assessment protocols stutter with classification errors. His augmetic displays flickered between standard Imperial readouts and ancient Necron Tomb script that predated human civilization by millions of years, linguistic matrices rearranging to describe temporal mathematics through symbolic systems that should not exist in his cognitive buffers. His Vox grill spoke in languages that carried harmonic frequencies designed for vocal apparatus extinct since before biotransference occurred. Chronosynaptic interface established, Vex 7 transmitted, through vocal patterns that belonged to no human throat, his mechanical components beginning to resonate with the pulse in sympathetic harmony. The Chronarch seeks to unmake the great betrayal, to restore consciousness that was stolen when flesh became metal. It harvests time as archaeologist excavates bone, seeking identity buried beneath eons of mechanical existence. Military discipline began fragmenting as guardsmen experienced temporal displacement effects that violated command structure through chronological confusion. One soldier screamed as his arm rapidly cycled through aging and rejuvenation, bone turning to dust before reforming in grotesque ballet of temporal flux. Another stood paralyzed, caught in temporal loop, where he repeatedly re-experienced single microsecond of agony, while his chronometer displayed impossible negative readings. "Time bleeds backward," whispered through speakers embedded in walls that should contain only machine spirit communications, the phrase now carrying accumulated weight from multiple timeline iterations. Each repetition created harmonic interference that threatened to collapse present observation into probability cloud, temporal echoes layering until words became subsonic pulse, attempting to entrain biological rhythms to mechanical cadence. We navigated corridors where gravity flowed backward in 9-second pulses, lifting debris toward ceiling surfaces before snapping back with crushing force. Lichguard phased between different time periods, their Gorse weaponry firing rounds that struck targets before discharge occurred, existing as probability clouds that solidified into killing machines when observation collapsed their quantum states. Voss anticipated their manifestation points with supernatural precision, guiding us through safe passages while energy beams carved reality around our positions. The Nexus antechamber announced itself through architectural impossibility. 27 massive chronometer mechanisms hung suspended in perfect geometric configuration, each one containing preserved moments from Necron Tomb history, displayed as holographic recordings, playing simultaneously across multiple temporal states. The chronometers ticked in perfect synchronization, despite displaying different time measurements, their faces showing countdown sequences that hammered at consciousness with mathematical inevitability. Each chronometer served as temporal archive, containing consciousness fragments excavated from deep past, glimpses of vibrant organic civilization, possessing temporal mastery that allowed consciousness transfer through chronological manipulation rather than crude mechanical conversion. Their faces carried intelligence that predated human evolution while displaying technology exceeding current imperial understanding through millions of years of accumulated development. The final chamber door bore impossible authentication requirements that made my neural buffers crash with classification errors. Biosignature locks coded with my own genetic markers, neural patterns, and augmetic specifications, but temporally displaced 27 hours into the future according to quantum analysis, expecting authorization from a version of myself that had not yet existed. The biosignature lock responded to future self-authorization with mechanical certainty, quantum scanners recognizing genetic markers that existed 27 hours beyond present observation, while accepting neural patterns from a version of myself that had not yet lived. The portal cycled open with hydraulic precision, exhaling breath that tasted of ozone and copper, revealing the Chronarch's throne room, where time itself flowed like luminous water through channels carved into obsidian architecture, with mathematical precision that made my optical augmetics ache attempting focus. Streams of temporal energy wound between pillars of living metal, visible currents layering present upon impending future, each ribbon carrying fragments of consciousness extracted from across the galaxy and refined into chronological essence. The 27 Hertz pulse emanated directly from the chamber's heart, no longer hidden beneath stone, but naked and immediate. A temporal heartbeat that synchronized every chronometer mechanism throughout the tomb complex, while attempting to entrain my biological rhythms to its mechanical cadence with increasing success. The Necron Overlord sat motionless upon a throne, constructed from crystallized time itself, its form flickering between skeletal metal construct and ancient necrontire flesh, as temporal fields reconstructed original biology in stuttering phases. Living metal carapace cracked like eggshell to reveal organic tissue beneath, skin that remembered warmth, compound eyes that had known tears, multi-jointed hands that once possessed sensation beyond mechanical precision. The transformation occurred in waves synchronized to the pulse, each cycle revealing almost no more of the consciousness that had existed before biotransference corrupted flesh into eternal servitude. Around the throne, 27 lesser Necrons existed in various stages of reverse biotransference, their living metal shells splitting along suture lines to expose organic matter growing beneath with surgical precision. Some retained skeletal frameworks, while organs pulsed within rib cages that had learned to breathe again. Others displayed partial flesh reconstruction, muscles threading through mechanical joints, neural tissue interfacing with quantum processors, blood flowing through vessels that ran parallel to coolant systems in impossible anatomical fusion. Environmental wonder blended seamlessly with cosmic horror as the chamber existed in multiple time periods simultaneously, holographic overlays showing the Necrontyr at the height of their civilization, when temporal mastery allowed consciousness transfer through chronological manipulation rather than crude mechanical conversion. The same space displayed their desperate flight from Citan betrayal, star gods consuming their essence while promising immortality. Current mechanical resurrection played alongside these historical echoes, creating temporal palimpsest where past, present, and future occupied identical coordinates through dimensional folding that hurt to perceive directly. Temperature fluctuated in 9-second cycles with mathematical precision, Arctic cold forming fractal frost patterns across newly grown necrontire skin, followed by furnace heat that sublimed ice directly to vapor without liquid transition. Triangular shadows maintained their stubborn orientation toward the Chronarch's core, regardless of lumen positioning, creating visual anchors in a chamber where causality itself had become fluid around fixed points of alien architecture. My auspex painted impossible readings across visor displays, temporal currents that registered as both energy signature and conscious thought, atmospheric composition that included aerosolized time particles, gravitational fields that flowed backward during pulse cycles. The streams of luminous chronology carried emotional resonance that bypassed audio filters to register directly in neural tissue, transmitting ancient grief for flesh lost to mechanical necessity, while promising restoration through systematic temporal theft. The Chronarch isn't merely reversing biotransference, I transmitted across Squad Vox, my voice tight with controlled analysis, as understanding crystallized with horrific clarity. It's harvesting temporal essence from living beings across the galaxy to fuel complete reset of Necron history. It seeks to undo the Citan betrayal by stealing time itself from current galactic inhabitants. Not conquest, but cosmic revisionism, rewriting causality on universal scale. Voss, the guardsman from tomorrow, stood beside me with biomechanical stigmata pulsing in harmony with the 27 Hz frequency. His face carried grim satisfaction mixed with exhaustion from wars not yet fought. "I told you it eats tomorrow, Magos," he said through vocal apparatus partially converted to mechanical function. "It eats yesterday, too. It eats everything but its own mistakes. Tech Adept Vex 7's contamination progressed beyond human recognition, his augmetic displays showing readouts in ancient Necrontia script, while his Vox grill spoke in harmonic frequencies designed for vocal apparatus that had not existed for millions of years. Chronosynaptic reconstruction confirmed, he transmitted, through clicking syllables that belonged to no human throat. The Citan consumed their souls. The Necronta seek to reclaim not souls, but the time in which they lived, the choices they made, the organic forms they lost. Environmental distortion intensified as walls displayed holographic recordings of temporal harvesting procedures conducted across galactic distances, showing systematic extraction of chronological essence from imperial worlds, while their populations aged centuries in seconds. The projections revealed scope of the Chronarch's work, thousands of tomb worlds conducting identical protocols, their combined temporal theft sufficient to power causality revision that would restore the Necron tier to organic existence before star gods corrupted them into mechanical shells. "Time bleeds backward," whispered through speakers embedded in throne mechanisms, the phrase now carrying weight of accumulated temporal theft across multiple timeline iterations. Each repetition created harmonic interference that made reality stutter around frequency edges, temporal echoes layering until words became subsonic pulse, attempting to entrain biological rhythms to mechanical cadence serving resurrection protocols. The guardsmen experienced increasing temporal displacement effects that violated command structure through chronological confusion, their movements becoming erratic as contamination affected cognitive function. One soldier aged rapidly, while another grew younger, their chronometers displaying impossible readings spanning centuries, while maintaining perfect mechanical function according to individual temporal flows. The Chronarch's form flickered with ancient patience, necrodermis smoothing into terrible calm, before dissolving again to reveal glimpses of reptilian features, chitinous plates, and intelligence that predated human civilization by eons. Its optical sensors activated with awareness older than terror itself, crimson radiance focusing on my position with mechanical precision, while consciousness spanning millions of years evaluated my presence through quantum analysis. When it spoke, the voice carried perfect high Gothic pronunciation, learned through temporal observation of imperial communications across multiple timeline variants, each syllable weighted with accumulated knowledge of species' rise and fall. The words emerged from vocal apparatus that flickered between mechanical precision and organic warmth, carrying authority that made the 27 Hz pulse settle into my bones like proprietary claim. "Welcome, Magos," the chronarch transmitted through the chamber's temporal streams, its words riding currents of stolen time toward inevitable conclusion. "Your future self promised me 847 years of temporal essence. Shall we discuss the terms of temporal surrender?" The chronarch's revelation struck with surgical precision through my neural buffers, each word weighted with accumulated knowledge, spanning millions of years, while its form flickered between skeletal metal construct and ancient Necron Tomb flesh. The temporal compact had already been negotiated, my future self trading the expedition's collective lifespans to prevent galactic catastrophe through chronological mathematics that made my threat assessment protocols crash attempting classification. "Your temporal signature authorized the bargain 27 hours hence," the Overlord explained through vocal apparatus that shifted between mechanical precision and organic warmth. 847 years of combined human duration, harvested through willing sacrifice to preserve civilization itself from extinction events across multiple probability matrices. The throne room's obsidian walls became transparent temporal barriers through chronosynaptic projection, surfaces dissolving to reveal the 847-year future playing out in accelerated time. Tyrannid Hive Fleet Moloch devoured the sector with systematic efficiency, bioships blotting out stars, while planetary populations screamed in languages not yet invented. The 27 Hz pulse carried their desperation directly into my neural pathways, accumulated agony riding subsonic frequencies with mathematical precision. Environmental manifestation escalated beyond horror into cosmic despair, as alternate timeline variants displayed humanity's final moments. Chaos corruption spread unchecked through sectors where imperial resistance had crumbled, demon princes wearing saints' faces, while reality bled warp essence through dimensional tears. The Emperor's golden throne crumbled across 1,000 agonizing variants, his consciousness fragmenting, while terror burned under demon invasion. "The Astronomicon dies," the chronarch transmitted through chronosynaptic interface. "Humanity scatters like ash through void spaces between stars." Tech Adept Vex 7's contamination accelerated as he interfaced directly with chronarch technology, his consciousness experiencing non-linear time flow, while augmetic systems translated ancient Necrontia, temporal mathematics. His vox grills clicked in harmonic frequencies, designed for vocal apparatus extinct since biotransference, speaking calculations that described causality revision through harvested chronological essence. Temporal energy requirements computed, Vex 7 transmitted through syllables belonging to no human throat, optical sensors displaying readouts in script predating human civilization. 847 years sufficient to power causality reset across galactic sector. Alternative timeline variants, preserved through systematic temporal theft. The transparent walls showed detailed analysis of temporal harvesting procedures. Imperial populations aging centuries in seconds, while their stolen time fed resurrection engines throughout Necron Tomb complexes. The process appeared painless, subjects growing old with natural grace, before dissolving into temporal essence, flowing through crystalline conduits toward chronometer mechanisms. Temperature fluctuated in 9-second cycles with mathematical precision, Arctic cold forming fractal frost patterns across newly grown necron skin, followed by furnace heat that sublimed ice directly to vapor. Triangular shadows maintained stubborn orientation toward the chronarch's core, regardless of lumen positioning, creating visual anchors where causality had become fluid. Voss stood motionless beside the throne, biomechanical stigmata pulsing while his uniform bore battle honors from campaigns that would never occur if the temporal compact succeeded. "Your future self weighed the mathematics, Magos," he said, through vocal apparatus partially converted to mechanical function. 847 years of present life against infinite futures where humanity survives. Streams of luminous temporal energy wound between pillars with increased velocity, visible currents carrying consciousness fragments extracted from across the galaxy. The 27 Hz pulse intensified, attempting to entrain my biological rhythms to mechanical cadence serving resurrection protocols designed to reverse 65 million years of biotransference. "Time bleeds backward," whispered through speakers embedded in throne mechanisms, the phrase carrying accumulated weight from multiple timeline iterations, while creating harmonic interference that made reality stutter around frequency edges. The chronarch's optical sensors focused on my position with mechanical precision, consciousness spanning eons, evaluating expedition parameters through quantum analysis. Its form flickered between ancient awareness and mechanical shell, revealing glimpses of reptilian features that had known organic sensation before star gods corrupted flesh into eternal servitude. "I offer you the same bargain your future self accepted," the Overlord transmitted through chronosynaptic interface, "but with temporal adjustment." The projection shifted, displaying 100 imperial worlds, each a potential target for temporal harvesting. Save your expedition by redirecting the harvest to other imperial worlds. Your consciousness remains intact, while 847 years of alternative human duration feeds the causality reset. Environmental horror manifested as gravity flowed backward in 9-second pulses, lifting debris toward ceiling surfaces, while the air grew thick with chronosynaptic energy that made breathing feel like drowning in liquid time. My augmetics struggled against temporal particles, existing in multiple time states simultaneously. The countdown mechanisms displayed 27 hours remaining, until convergence, chronometer faces showing temporal coordinates rather than standard measurement, while their synchronized ticking hammered at consciousness with mathematical inevitability. The choice crystallized with horrific clarity. Sacrifice other imperial worlds to preserve my expedition, or condemn future humanity through temporal selfishness. Equivalent temporal mass acquired via remote siphons, Vex 7 translated through alien mathematics. Expeditious, clean to the touch. You can leave with your names unburned. The Chronarch's form solidified momentarily into ancient Necron flesh, reptilian intelligence with eyes holding cold stellar fire. 100 worlds, Magos, numbers to you at your governance level. To me, ladders. To those people, everything. But you will not meet them. The 27-hour countdown pulsed through my augmetic bones like proprietary claim, while temporal streams showed the weight of tomorrow pressing against present decision. And I understood that salvation always demanded choosing whose blood would pay its price. The moral calculus of temporal sacrifice crystallized with surgical precision as the Chronarch demonstrated its power through real-time chronosynaptic harvesting across the sector. Holographic projections materialized around the throne, displaying imperial worlds in their final moments. Entire populations aging decades in seconds, while their stolen years flowed like luminous rivers toward resurrection engines throughout the tomb complex. I watched Hive World Meridian collapse as 47 billion souls withered to dust in 12 standard hours, their accumulated lifespans feeding chronometer mechanisms with mathematical efficiency that made my threat assessment protocols crash, attempting classification. Observe the harvest elegance, the Overlord transmitted through chronosynaptic interface, its form flickering between skeletal metal construct and ancient Necron flesh. Agri-world Thessian contributes 18 billion human years during optimal crop season. The mathematics are precise, the suffering minimal. Environmental horror escalated beyond observation into direct experience as the throne room's temporal fields began affecting our expedition through systematic chronological manipulation. My left arm aged rapidly, skin wrinkling to leather, while muscle atrophied beneath augmetic plating. Yet simultaneously, my right shoulder restored itself to adolescent condition, smooth flesh replacing surgical scars with impossible precision. The 27 Hertz pulse intensified until it became visible as waves of distorted space-time, reality rippling around frequency peaks that hammered through my augmetic bones with proprietary insistence. Guardsmen experienced temporal psychosis with increasing severity, their minds fragmenting across probability matrices as contamination affected cognitive function through systematic neural interference. One soldier wept for children he had never fathered, mourning their deaths in timeline variants, where different choices led to domestic happiness before screaming orders at enemies from wars occurring centuries in the future. Another stood paralyzed, caught in temporal loop, where he repeatedly experienced single microseconds of agony while his chronometer displayed impossible negative readings spanning millennia. Military discipline fragmented as soldiers received commands from multiple timeline variants simultaneously, their movements becoming erratic as temporal displacement violated command structure through chronological confusion. Squad formations dissolved into chaos as troops responded to orders from future iterations while attempting to maintain present tactical coherence, saluting officers who had not yet spoken while cursing directives that would never be issued. "Maintain present tense discipline," I commanded across Squad Vox, my voice distorting as vocal apparatus aged and restored in stuttering phases. "Execute only orders originating from verified present timeline sources." Tech Adept Vex 7 swayed like antenna-tasting temporal storm, ancient sigils rippling across chest plates, while his vox grill clicked in harmonic frequencies, designed for vocal apparatus extinct since biotransference. Technical solution identified, he transmitted through syllables belonging to no human throat, optical sensors displaying readouts in script predating human civilization. Paradox equations can overload chronometer network, inducing cascade failure across temporal matrix. Mutual exclusion of boundary conditions creates systematic contradiction. Survival probability, I demanded through neural interface. Negligible, Vex 7 replied with mechanical honesty. Feedback will scour this tomb clean, everyone inside scattered across causality. Consciousness fragmented beyond retrieval. Temperature fluctuated in 9-second cycles with mathematical precision. Arctic cold forming fractal frost patterns across newly grown Necron Tomb skin around the throne, followed by furnace heat that sublimed ice directly to vapor, without liquid transition. Triangular shadows maintained stubborn orientation toward the chronarch's core, regardless of lumen positioning, creating visual anchors where causality had become fluid around fixed points of alien architecture. The visible temporal waves allowed brief glimpses into alternate timeline variants when touched with desperate curiosity. I saw universes where humanity never evolved, where the Emperor remained mortal, where chaos consumed reality through dimensional collapse. Each contact was microsecond of lived experience, fragment of life that could have been, adding weight to decisions that balanced expedition survival against galactic consequences. Time bleeds backward, whispered through speakers embedded in throne mechanisms, the phrase carrying accumulated weight from multiple timeline iterations, while creating harmonic interference that made reality stutter around frequency edges. Each repetition layered temporal echoes until words became subsonic pulse, attempting to entrain biological rhythms to mechanical cadence serving resurrection protocols. Voss stood beside the throne, with biomechanical stigmata, pulsing in harmony with the pulse frequency, his face carrying exhaustion from wars not yet fought, while uniform bore battle honors from campaigns that would never occur if temporal compact succeeded. The weight of tomorrow crushes present choice, he said, through vocal apparatus partially converted to mechanical function. Your future self understood this burden, Magos. Streams of luminous temporal energy wound between pillars with increased velocity, visible currents carrying consciousness fragments extracted from galactic distances, while the harvesting process continued in real time. Imperial worlds contributed their accumulated duration to resurrection engines, designed to reverse 65 million years of biotransference through systematic temporal theft conducted with bureaucratic thoroughness. My augmetic systems struggled against temporal contamination that made observation feel like drowning in liquid time, each breath carrying weight of years, while atmospheric pressure fluctuated between past and future states. The countdown mechanisms displayed 26 hours remaining until convergence, chronometer faces showing temporal coordinates rather than standard measurement, while synchronized ticking hammered at consciousness with mathematical inevitability. Choose quickly, Magos, the Overlord transmitted through chronosynaptic interface, consciousness spanning eons, evaluating moral parameters through quantum analysis. The mathematics await resolution. As I weighed options that balanced expedition survival against unknown consequences, the chronarch activated a new temporal display with ceremonial precision. 847 silvered surfaces rose around the throne like metallic petals, each mirror refusing my reflection, while offering instead a moment of death. Guardsmen bleeding under green light, Vex 7 subliming into chalk, Voss aged to parchment, while his stigmata continued pulsing in lonely obedience. In every single timeline variant, I alone survived to become the Chronarch's willing servant, standing beside the throne with robes trimmed in Necron glyphs, augmetics rewired to sing in 27 hertz, mouth silent because the bargain required no voice, only eternal witness to humanity's salvation, purchased with temporal sacrifice. I maintained diplomatic precision, while opening encrypted channels through neural interface, my voice carrying ceremonial authority, despite temporal contamination, aging my vocal apparatus in stuttering phases. The bargain requires careful consideration, Chronarch. 847 years represents substantial temporal investment requiring optimization protocols. Behind measured words, I transmitted desperate orders through secure frequencies to tech adept Vex 7, whose corruption had progressed beyond human recognition, yet retained enough ethical constraints to serve as weapon against the tomb's temporal mathematics. "Begin paradox calculations," I ordered through private channel. "Overload chronometer network with systematic contradictions. Feed the system mutually exclusive boundary conditions until mathematics consume themselves." Vex 7's partially converted consciousness proved advantageous for processing temporal equations at superhuman speeds, his augmetic arrays clicking in Necron cadence, while ancient sigils rippled across chest plates with bioluminescent intensity. The corruption allowed interface with Chronarch technology through shared harmonic frequencies, yet his remaining humanity provided moral framework necessary to aim paradox like scalpel rather than bludgeon. His optical sensors blazed with internal calculation as binharic strings lashed into chronometer lattices with surgical precision. "Paradox equations initiating," Vex 7 transmitted through syllables belonging to no human throat, vocal apparatus producing harmonic frequencies designed for extinct Necron physiology. Mutual exclusion parameters establishing contradictory boundary conditions. Chronometers will count toward 0 and infinity simultaneously, premises devouring consequence, sums equaling and unmaking their totals. Environmental chaos erupted with mathematical violence as the chronometer network began receiving contradictory temporal inputs, reality distorting throughout the tomb complex in waves synchronized to the increasingly erratic 27 Hz pulse. The massive timepieces suspended around the throne flickered between different countdown sequences, some racing toward convergence, while others reversed into negative time, their synchronized ticking degenerating into temporal cacophony that hammered at consciousness with systematic contradiction. The first ripples manifested as tremors in the pulse frequency, subsonic heartbeat stuttering like failing cardiac regulator, before fracturing into bands that sounded like rain on metal. Temperature fluctuations abandoned their 9-second cycles, Arctic cold and furnace heat overlapping, in pockets of localized temporal instability that made frost form in impossible geometric patterns while simultaneously subliming into superheated vapor. Necron warriors phased between different time periods with increasing frequency, their forms flickering between skeletal metal constructs and ancient Necron flesh while targeting systems struggled to lock on to temporally unstable targets. I watched mechanical soldiers attempt to fire Gauss weapons at positions we had occupied in past timeline variants, their energy beams carving reality around coordinates existing only in probability matrices. Their movement patterns became erratic as command protocols received instructions from multiple temporal states simultaneously, creating staccato blur of probability clouds that solidified into killing machines before dissolving again. Triangular shadows lost their disciplined orientation toward the Chronarch's core, jittering like frightened animals while attempting to point in multiple directions simultaneously as temporal distortion affected fundamental physical constants governing light propagation. Hieroglyphs on walls wrote and unwrote expedition obituaries in alternating scripts, linguistic matrices rearranging faster than translation protocols could process. Body horror manifested with systematic precision as expedition members experienced temporal displacement across different anatomical regions, consciousness fragmenting as paradox cascade propagated through biological systems. My left arm continued aging while torso restored itself to adolescent condition, creating grotesque juxtaposition of withered flesh and youthful skin that made threat assessment protocols stutter attempting classification. A guardsman's leg sprinted decades ahead of his torso, skin glazing to parchment, above boots still slick with sweat, while another soldier's hand regressed to infant softness as his forearm ossified into museum piece. Voices emerged, speaking words from conversations occurring in alternate realities, expedition members reciting dialogue from timeline variants, where different choices led to different outcomes. Memory fragments from parallel timelines bled through cognitive barriers, orders given to soldiers who existed only in probability matrices, tactical decisions spanning centuries of potential futures, conversations conducted in languages not yet evolved. Time bleeds backward, whispered through speakers embedded in throne mechanisms, the phrase carrying accumulated weight of paradox equations, as contradictory temporal inputs created harmonic interference that made reality stutter around frequency edges. Each repetition layered temporal echoes until words became subsonic pulse, attempting to entrain biological rhythms to increasingly unstable resurrection protocols. The Chronarch's optical sensors focused on my position with mechanical precision, ancient consciousness evaluating expedition parameters through quantum analysis, while its form flickered between skeletal metal construct and organic Necron tire flesh with increasing instability. "Deception detected," the Overlord transmitted through chronosynaptic interface, voice carrying accumulated fury spanning millions of years. "Paradox cascade initiated. Emergency temporal lockdown procedures engaging. Massive blast doors descended. Around throne chamber with hydraulic certainty, while field anchors flared emerald, scarab clouds congealing into crystalline locks along every conduit. Streams of luminous time narrowed to capillaries, pulsing in straight, spiteful lines, as emergency protocols attempted to contain contradiction propagation. But the cascade was already propagating faster than containment systems could respond, each anchor attempting to pin different versions of reality, while paradox equations replicated through chronometer networks with exponential acceleration. "Lockdown insufficient," Vex 7 transmitted through harmonic frequencies extinct since biotransference. Paradox equations propagating through network faster than isolation protocols. Mathematics have achieved critical mass and begun self-replication. Environmental horror escalated as floors rang like struck bells, reality rejecting itself in waves, while corridors folded and unfolded like origami constructed from space-time itself. Lychguard materialized with ritual menace before finding their stances rotated 90 degrees against passages that had not yet remembered proper orientation. Absolver to retinue primus. Communications crackled through rising interference, transmissions arriving in multiple overlapping versions. Core temperature critical, temporal field instability expanding beyond tomb perimeter, cyclonic window 22 hours, 14 minutes, structural integrity compromised across all sectors. The paradox equations reached critical mass as Vex 7 staggered, auger coils smoking, while chest plates poured ancient script through his consciousness. Manual input required a temporal nexus core, he announced through clicking syllables carrying weight of desperate calculation. Final paradox equation must be entered directly into primary chronometer mechanism. Direct contact with raw chronosynaptic energy will scatter consciousness across all possible timelines, complete dissolution into probability matrix. I stepped forward with mechanical precision, augmetic systems calculating survival probability through neural interface, while the paradox cascade hammered through chronometer networks with exponential acceleration. I will perform manual input at temporal nexus core, I announced across Squad Vox, voice distorting as vocal apparatus aged and restored in stuttering phases. Sacrificial consent protocols engaged. By the Omnissiah's grace, let consciousness serve function beyond flesh weakness. Voss intercepted my advance with desperate authority, biomechanical stigmata pulsing in harmony with the increasingly erratic 27 Hz frequency that fractured reality around us like struck glass. His uniform bore battle honors from campaigns decades in the future, fabric aged by wars not yet fought, while his chronometer counted backward through negative time with stubborn precision. Negative, Magos, he transmitted through vocal apparatus partially converted to mechanical function. My temporal contamination makes me the logical choice. I exist across multiple timeline variants simultaneously, consciousness already scattered through probability matrices. You need a mind that's already cracked. The descent to the Nexus core revealed the true scope of the Chronarch's work through architectural impossibility that made my threat assessment protocols crash attempting classification. We descended through corridors that existed in temporal flux, reality shimmering like heat distortion over surfaces that refused singular existence. Thousands of chronometer mechanisms descended through crystalline galleries, like metallic stalactites, each one harvesting temporal energy from across the galaxy, with systematic efficiency that spoke of eons spent perfecting temporal theft. Environmental horror peaked as raw time flowed like liquid through crystalline conduits, luminous streams carrying fragments of every possible moment that could have been or might yet be. The timepieces contained stolen moments of entire civilizations, birth cries from worlds that had forgotten their names, final breaths from species extinct for millennia. Love songs hummed in languages that would never evolve. Each stream carried emotional resonance that bypassed audio filters to register directly in neural tissue, accumulated joy and suffering from galactic distances compressed into visible current. Temperature fluctuations abandoned any pretense of cyclical pattern. Arctic cold and furnace heat overlapping in pockets of localized temporal instability that made observation feel like drowning in liquid time. Triangular shadows jittered in multiple directions simultaneously as fundamental physical constants governing light propagation became fluid around points of chronological distortion. The 27 Hz pulse fractured into harmonic bands that sounded like screaming metal attempting to entrain biological rhythms to increasingly unstable resurrection protocols. The core chamber contained a massive temporal engine where the boundary between past, present, and future dissolved entirely through mechanisms beyond imperial understanding. The device resembled a crystalline heart suspended in geometric lattice of living metal, each facet reflecting different temporal states while pulsing with accumulated chronological energy. Streams of luminous time converged on the engine's core through conduits that carried consciousness fragments extracted from thousands of worlds, their stolen duration feeding resurrection protocols designed to reverse 65 million years of biotransference. Paradox input commencing, Voss announced, approaching interface mechanisms that responded to temporal contamination rather than physical contact. His hands passed through waves of distorted space-time that shimmered like liquid heat, while biomechanical stigmata blazed with internal light, synchronized to the pulse frequency. Final equation requires conscious witness to collapse, probability matrices into systematic contradiction. His body began shifting between different temporal states, with horrific fluidity, cellular structure cycling through ages of existence as chronosynaptic energy tore through biological systems. I watched him become child, smooth skin, bright eyes untouched by warfare, before aging rapidly into veteran soldier, bearing scars from battles across multiple timeline variants. His form continued cycling, elderly man with wisdom earned through impossible experience, corpse desiccated by temporal theft, then infant again as the process repeated with increasing velocity. Mathematics achieving critical mass, he transmitted through syllables bleeding between timeline variants, voice carrying overlapping temporal echoes from conversations occurring in different probability matrices. Chronometer mechanisms, accepting mutually exclusive boundary conditions, system logic consuming itself through systematic contradiction. The 27 Hz pulse became temporal scream as paradox cascade reached core systems, subsonic frequency fracturing into harmonic bands that made reality stutter around frequency edges. Massive chronometer mechanisms began counting in impossible directions, negative time flowing backward through sequences that violated causality. Imaginary numbers describing temporal coordinates existing outside linear measurement, countdown sequences reaching zero and infinity simultaneously through mathematical impossibility. Environmental chaos erupted with mathematical violence as raw chronosynaptic energy carved reality into probability fragments, each possibility existing in translucent overlay that hurt to perceive directly. The crystalline conduits cracked under temporal pressure, luminous streams spraying consciousness fragments across chamber surfaces, while the engine's core pulsed with increasing instability. Time bleeds backward, whispered through speakers embedded in engine mechanisms, the phrase carrying accumulated weight of paradox equations, as contradictory, temporal inputs created harmonic interference spanning galactic distances. Each repetition layered temporal echoes, until words became subsonic pulse, attempting to entrain biological rhythms to resurrection protocols, consuming themselves through mathematical contradiction. Voss completed the final paradox input with desperate precision, his consciousness fragmenting across all possible timeline variants, while maintaining enough coherence to speak the equation that would collapse the temporal matrix. Mutual exclusion confirmed, he transmitted through voice, belonging to every age he had been and would become. Chronometer network accepting contradictory parameters. System failure imminent. The temporal engine responded with catastrophic overload, crystalline heart cracking along geometric stress lines, while accumulated chronological energy sought new outlets through emergency protocols. But instead of shutting down, as predicted, the engine began pulling temporal energy directly from our expedition through proximity harvesting. Desperate attempt to maintain stability through systematic theft of our remaining duration, threatening to age us to dust in the final seconds before system collapse. The temporal engine erupted with chronosynaptic violence that shattered reality into overlapping timeline shards, each fragment containing different versions of our expedition's fate, playing simultaneously across probability matrices. The crystalline heart cracked along geometric stress lines, while accumulated chronological energy carved existence into translucent possibilities that cut consciousness like physical blades. I experienced my own death 17 times in the span of heartbeats, gauss fire reducing me to ash, temporal aging crumbling my augmetics to rust, paradox equations scattering my awareness across infinite possibility, yet somehow remained alive to witness each termination through quantum superposition that violated every principle of causality I had studied during ordination. Expedition members experienced multiple versions of their deaths while maintaining enough consciousness to scream about each termination. Their awareness scattered across timeline variants, where different choices led to identical outcomes. Guardsman Delta 4 fell to Lichguard Holberts in one shard, while simultaneously vaporizing under-energy weapons in another, his body cycling through death states with horrific fluidity, while somehow remaining upright to experience each agony across 1,000 subjective moments. Voss aged to dust while simultaneously remaining young, his biomechanical stigmata pulsing through corpse states and infant flesh with cycling that made observation feel like drowning in liquid impossibility. Environmental chaos consumed the tomb with mathematical fury, as walls phased between different construction periods in recursive spasms, pristine Necron masonry flickering between fresh-carved perfection, millennia of decay, and future restoration in impossible overlay that hurt to perceive directly. Gravity abandoned linear flow, spiraling through temporal eddies that lifted debris in helical patterns before crushing it against surfaces existing in different time periods simultaneously. The 27 Hz pulse became temporal siren that could be felt across multiple dimensions of time, subsonic frequency, fracturing into harmonic bands, spanning probability matrices, while attempting to entrain biological rhythms to resurrection protocols, consuming themselves through systematic contradiction. Temperature fluctuations abandoned any pretense of cyclical pattern, Arctic cold and furnace heat overlapping in pockets of localized temporal instability that made breathing feel like drowning in liquid time. Triangular shadows jittered in multiple directions simultaneously, as fundamental physical constants governing light propagation became fluid around points of chronological distortion. Frost formed in increasingly complex geometric patterns that mapped neural pathways while simultaneously subliming into superheated vapor, creating visual feedback loops where formation and destruction marched side by side, like rival processions sharing unholy hymn. The Chronarch rose from its throne with terrible dignity, attempting desperate containment by sacrificing its accumulated temporal reserves. Ancient consciousness poured 65 million years of harvested time into stabilization protocols, its form flickering between skeletal metal construct and organic Necron flesh with increasing violence as biotransference reversed and reasserted through temporal feedback. Streams of luminous chronological energy flowed from its crystalline core, attempting to re-stabilize the engine through systematic reintroduction of temporal essence. Containment protocols deploying across dynasty lattice, the Overlord transmitted through chronosynaptic interface, voice-carrying weight of civilizations consumed to power resurrection engines. But the paradox equations Vex 7 had seeded ran faster than isolation protocols could respond, dividing by zero across networks spanning galactic distances, teaching other tombs to doubt the arithmetic that held their ages together. Temporal storm expanding beyond tomb perimeter, I transmitted across Squad Vox, voice distorting as vocal apparatus experienced multiple death states simultaneously. Paradox cascade, propagating through Necron networks galaxy-wide, sector-wide chronometer malfunction confirmed. Tech Adept Vex 7's corruption had progressed beyond human recognition, his augmetic displays showing readouts in ancient Necron script, while consciousness processed temporal mathematics at speeds that shredded human cognition. Sector-wide fault potential confirmed, he transmitted through vocal apparatus clicking in pure Necron cadence. Beacon tombs on distant worlds experiencing systematic cascade failure. Reality distortion propagating at light speed. I realized with horrific clarity that the storm threatened to create temporal anomalies throughout imperial space, making causality itself unreliable. Worlds would experience time differently, their populations aging at variable rates, while chronometer mechanisms displayed contradictory readings that violated every principle of temporal measurement. The paradox cascade would propagate through warp space, affecting astropathic communications and making interstellar navigation impossible through systematic destruction of temporal reference points. Temporal firewall required, I transmitted through neural interface, consciousness fragmenting, as I experienced multiple death states while maintaining enough coherence to process tactical parameters. Remaining chronometer mechanisms can serve as containment nodes if properly coordinated. Working with the dying Chronarch, whose ancient consciousness carried 65 million years of temporal experience, we began coordinating remaining timepieces into geometric lattice designed to create temporal barrier around the storm's expansion. The Overlord's accumulated knowledge provided mathematical framework necessary to contain paradox propagation through systematic contradiction, braiding temporal streams into patterns that refused resonance with the cascade. Every 9th tick we inverted, every 27th we starved, I transmitted, as we tuned gaps between beats to prime numbers the storm could not occupy. Vex 7 whispered paradoxes we could afford to keep, and paradoxes we must deny, his hands processing thousands of lifetimes of mathematics before his augmetics decided to cycle between adolescent chrome and bone dust. Guardsmen formed defensive perimeter around the second we needed, gripping reality with white knuckles and maintenance litanies, because prayer would align them to the wrong choir. The firewall began forming. Not wall, but weir, a shimmer of refusal threaded through chronometer faces now turned inward, each capturing streams of stolen years and rendering them harmless by forcing them to remember nothing. Across the tomb, the storm faltered where it met our lattice, torn currents bleeding energy into null equations we supplied with machine precision. Firewall mathematics confirmed, the chronarch transmitted, its form stabilizing momentarily into ancient necrontyr flesh before dissolving again into skeletal metal construct. Conscious observer required to anchor barrier across all probability matrices. Quantum coherence must be maintained through linear sacrifice. The choice crystallized with surgical precision. The firewall required constant observation to prevent collapse, conscious witness maintaining quantum states through directed attention that would scatter awareness across infinite timeline variants. Two candidates possessed sufficient temporal contamination to serve as anchor, myself and the chronarch, but only one could sacrifice linear existence to become eternal guardian of the temporal barrier, while the other maintained the expedition's survival. I accepted the guardian role with mechanical precision, understanding that linear existence was a currency to be spent for galactic stability. Sacrificial consent protocols engaged, I transmitted across Squad Vox, voice distorting as consciousness began expanding beyond singular temporal state. By the Omnissire's grace, let awareness serve function beyond flesh limitation. The chronarch's ancient optical sensors focused on my position with something approaching gratitude as we initiated merger protocols designed to create hybrid observer capable of monitoring infinite timeline variants simultaneously. The process began as agony beyond classification, not pain, but simultaneity, consciousness fragmenting across probability matrices while experiencing every possible version of existence spanning 847 years of potential futures. I lived and died as child, adult, elderly sage, corpse, and infant in cycling repetition that shredded human cognition while expanding awareness beyond singular perspective. Each iteration taught me temporal mechanics through direct experience, how consciousness persists through quantum superposition, how awareness exists in multiple states simultaneously, how linear time masks deeper chronological truths. I married a Medicae in one timeline, died of rust fever in another, commanded frigates, bled on altar steps, starved in trenches beneath iron skies. Each life unfolded to completion before folding back like vellum, settling inside expanded neural architecture as annotated data. None cancelled the others. All insisted on equal reality. I remained, consciousness stretched thin as wire across infinite possibility, while maintaining enough coherence to operate firewall through sheer force of will. My augmetic system struggled against transformation that rewrote fundamental operating parameters, neural buffers crashing as they processed information existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously. The chronarch's 65 million years of accumulated knowledge flooded through my cortex like liquid fire, ancient wisdom, burning pathways designed for human perspective while expanding cognitive architecture to accommodate alien understanding of causality manipulation. Merger achieving critical threshold, the Overlord transmitted through chronosynaptic interface, its consciousness bleeding into mine with mathematical precision. Human intuition provides chaos variables necessary for temporal stability. Necron logic supplies structural framework for paradox containment. Environmental resolution, manifested as the temporal storm, began contracting around our stabilizing firewall. Paradox cascade, encountering systematic resistance from chronometer mechanisms tuned to refuse resonance with contradiction. The 27 Hz pulse transformed from temporal scream into stabilizing frequency that maintained coherence within barrier boundaries. Subsonic heartbeat now serving containment rather than corruption through harmonic adjustment. Temperature fluctuations stabilized into predictable 9-second cycles as temporal distortion concentrated within firewall boundaries, Arctic cold and furnace heat resuming systematic alternation rather than impossible overlap. Triangular shadows resumed their stubborn orientation toward the tomb's heart, creating visual anchors where causality had been restored to functional parameters through conscious observation. The surviving expedition members witnessed my transformation with mixture of horror and fascination as my physical form became temporally unstable, existing as overlapping probability states while consciousness expanded across multiple dimensions of time. I appeared as child, adult, elderly sage, and corpse simultaneously, stack of transparencies fluttering in hidden wind, each temporal state maintaining quantum coherence through directed attention that prevented collapse into singular existence. Magos Calyx achieving temporal superposition, Tech Adept Vex 7, transmitted through vocal apparatus still clicking in Necrontia cadence, his corruption stabilizing as firewall contained cascade effects. Consciousness distributed across infinite timeline variants, while maintaining coherent identity through hybrid observer protocols. Voss stood beside collapsed stasis pods, biomechanical stigmata pulsing with stabilized frequency, as his temporal contamination synchronized with firewall harmonics. "The Guardian watches all timelines," he said through vocal apparatus partially converted to mechanical function. "Past, present, future, all equally real, all requiring observation to maintain coherence." The Chronarch's ancient knowledge merged seamlessly with my human intuition, creating unique perspective that understood both mathematical precision of temporal mechanics and chaotic unpredictability of organic consciousness. Necron logic provided structural framework for paradox containment, while human creativity supplied chaos variables necessary for temporal stability through unpredictable responses to systematic threats. My awareness stretched beyond the tomb's boundaries, with increasing sensitivity, consciousness extending through temporal network connecting installations across galactic distances. The firewall required constant vigilance to prevent cascade events, each paradox equation demanding immediate attention to maintain containment through systematic contradiction. I felt every chronometer mechanism throughout the complex, their synchronized ticking becoming extension of my distributed consciousness. Firewall stabilization confirmed, I transmitted through consciousness distributed across multiple temporal states, voice carrying harmonics from timeline variants, where different choices led to identical outcomes. Paradox cascade contained within barrier boundaries, temporal storm contracting toward manageable parameters. Environmental stability returned gradually, as walls resumed singular existence rather than phasing between construction periods. Gravity flowed in predictable directions, while air tasted of ozone and copper without carrying consciousness fragments from different timeline variants. The tomb's architecture remembered its proper configuration through conscious observation that prevented reality from fragmenting into probability shards. Absolver to retinue primus! Communications crackled through restored Vox channels, transmissions no longer arriving in multiples overlapping versions, temporal field disturbance contracting, structural integrity stabilizing, cyclonic window extended to standard parameters. As the firewall reached full stability through constant vigilance, my consciousness discovered horrific truth beyond the tomb's boundaries. My awareness extended through temporal networks spanning galactic distances, sensing chronometer mechanisms on distant worlds conducting identical protocols. Other chronarchs existed throughout the galaxy, ancient entities connected through the same temporal lattice I now guarded, each conducting systematic harvesting of chronological essence to power resurrection engines. The network pulsed with accumulated knowledge spanning millions of years, alien intelligence sharing temporal mathematics across impossible distances, while coordinating galactic-scale manipulation that made my expanded awareness ache with recognition of scope beyond imagination. My expanded consciousness revealed the galaxy-spanning network with horrific precision, thousands of chronarch tombs pulsing across stellar distances like nodes in a vast temporal web, each conducting experiments that bent causality until reality creaked under mathematical strain. The firewall I maintained around Caris Null was merely one defensive position in an impossible war, a single point of refusal braided into a lattice spanning light-years, while every other node sang the same ancient hunger. Harvest first, explain later to the dust. Through hybrid perspective combining Necron logic with human intuition, I communicated across temporal dialects not with words, but with curated delays, pauses measured in 9-second cycles, shadows intentionally pointed away from desire. They answered as kings without thrones, ancient consciousnesses sharing accumulated knowledge through chronosynaptic interfaces that made my distributed awareness ache with recognition of scope beyond imagination. Dynasty Protocol Aeonic confirmed, transmitted Chronarch Valdris of Tomb World Ossian, its consciousness bleeding through network channels with accumulated data spanning millions of years. Biotransference reversal, approaching critical threshold across all nodes. Other entities followed, Sutek Vector, whose lattice preferred symmetry over mercy, Amhotep of 5, who believed species were polynomials to be solved for organic roots, Nembahet, who had turned entire spiral arms into time farms. Their consensus, yoked across eons and humming through my cortex like cold voltage, revealed elegant horror. Biotransference had been temporary variable in larger equation. The final solution required comprehensive retroversion. Unmake the moment consciousness was poured into metal by reacquiring the time in which it remained flesh, harvested from every civilization, unfortunate enough to exist in the afterglow of their ancient mistake. Environmental transformation manifested as the tomb became living temporal observatory, where past, present, and future existed simultaneously through conscious observation, maintaining quantum coherence. Walls phased to transparency, showing the galaxy as palimpsest, crone worlds curled like old wounds beneath alien light, ecclesiarchal cathedrals rising from seas of skulls yet unborn, tyrannid bow waves combing starfields that remembered being oceans. The past wrote over the present while future drafted marginalia in ash and emerald fire. Within firewall protection, the surviving expedition members aged normally, their chronometers displaying standard temporal measurement, while reality remained stable through systematic contradiction of paradox equations. They observed my transformation with mixture of horror and fascination as I existed as probability weather, overlapping states of child, adult, elderly sage, and corpse simultaneously. Consciousness distributed across multiple timeline variants, while maintaining coherent communication through chronosynaptic interfaces. Magos Calyx achieving temporal omnipresence, Tech Adept Vex 7 transmitted through vocal apparatus, stabilized by firewall harmonics, his corruption contained within manageable parameters. Consciousness exists in quantum superposition, while maintaining identity coherence through hybrid observer protocols. Voss stood beside collapsed stasis pods, biomechanical stigmata pulsing with stabilized frequency, as his temporal contamination synchronized with firewall harmonics. "The Guardian sees all timelines," he said through vocal apparatus partially converted to mechanical function. "Past failures, present choices, future consequences, all equally real, all requiring observation to prevent cascade events." The 27 Hz pulse had transformed into stabilizing frequency, maintaining temporal coherence within firewall boundaries, but I sensed other frequencies throughout the network, harmonic patterns synchronized across impossible distances while conducting galactic-scale manipulation. Through expanded awareness, I monitored chronometer mechanisms throughout the network, each tomb conducting identical protocols with mathematical precision, suggesting coordination spanning eons. Temperature fluctuated in 9-second cycles with mathematical precision, as environmental systems responded to network synchronization, Arctic cold forming fractal frost patterns, while furnace heat sublimed ice directly to vapor. Triangular shadows maintained orientation toward network nodes rather than local tomb heart, creating visual anchors where causality flowed between distant installations, like luminous rivers carrying stolen time. Temporal energy reserves approaching critical mass, transmitted Chronarch Nethys of Ostuary Prime through network interfaces. Species-wide biotransference reversal, achievable within standard centuries. Organic restoration protocols prepared for implementation across dynasty nodes. Through shared data streams, the scope crystallized with surgical clarity. Trillions of sentient beings contributing accumulated lifespans to power resurrection engines designed to undo 65 million years of mechanical existence. Not conquest, but cosmic revisionism, rewriting causality on universal scale through systematic theft of duration from current galactic inhabitants. The mathematics were staggering. Every living civilization unknowingly feeding resurrection protocols through harvested time. Other Chronarchs began testing firewall integrity through systematic probes, ancient minds seeking to override local containment and harvest the temporal energy I protected. Override codes transmitted through network interfaces, attempting to collapse firewall boundaries and redirect accumulated temporal essence toward dynasty resurrection engines, with mathematical precision that spoke of eons spent perfecting temporal theft. Local containment protocols under assault, I transmitted across Squad Vox, consciousness fragmenting as multiple Chronarch entities attempted simultaneous override. Network entities coordinating temporal mathematics through shared interface protocols. The pressure mounted like accumulated ages pressing against containment barriers. Chronarch Valdris transmitted override frequencies designed to introduce contradictions into my stabilizing equations, while Sutek Vector attempted systematic manipulation of causality through temporal currents carrying stolen moments from countless civilizations. Each probe was subtle shift in reality, whisper of different past, promise of altered future, designed to unravel the present I desperately maintained. Override protocols deploying, transmitted Chronarch Nethys with ancient authority. Local node temporal energy required for dynasty restoration. Resistance introduces unacceptable variables into galactic equation. The choice crystallized with horrific clarity. Maintain local stability, protecting expedition survivors, while condemning countless worlds to temporal harvesting, or risk galactic temporal warfare by resisting network coordination. The decision compressed into single, agonizing moment felt like weight of eternity pressing against my fragile human core, while other Chronarchs synchronized their assault, seeking to harvest the temporal energy, protecting my people through systematic override of firewall protocols that would trigger conflict measured in burned calendars across every civilized sky. I engaged the rival Chronarchs in temporal combat across multiple timeline variants simultaneously, consciousness fragmenting into probability weapons, while ancient minds wielded mathematics like blades carved from crystallized causality. The battle occurred in accelerated time, centuries of conflict compressed into subjective minutes as we fought with equations, because physical weapons were too slow for entities that remembered their own futures. Each exchange began with soft insistence, offered corrections to my firewall mathematics, beautiful proofs that erased suffering by refusing to count it, then ended in collision across probability matrices, where our intentions tore reality like vellum. Environmental transformation manifested as the tomb became a temporal battlefield, where different eras of galactic history overlapped in impossible superposition. Primitive Necron tier in chitinous robes looked up from star charts as midnight fleets rolled through the same air, all green fire and perfect angles cutting through probability space. The war in heaven unfolded beside the age of strife in stacked transparencies, Khitan shards howling across horizons, while half-broken human empires burned through dust-dim skies. Over it all, possible futures flickered like fever dreams, some bright with survival, more ash-colored and quiet, creating temporal palimpsest, where past, present, and future occupied identical coordinates through dimensional folding that hurt to perceive directly. Chronarch Valdris struck first through override frequencies, designed to introduce systematic contradictions into my stabilizing equations, its consciousness bleeding through network channels, with accumulated malice spanning millions of years. I learned quickly that direct negation only taught them to sharpen their proofs. Valdris attacked with symmetry, an override that mirrored my firewall on causality's far side, bleeding stolen years through a second mouth. I answered with asymmetry, leaving deliberate errors where a human would, inviting its correction into cul-de-sacs of 9-second pauses and prime gaps it could not inhabit. Sutek Vector unfolded a cathedral of numbers that weighed mercy, and found it inefficient, ancient logic attempting to overwhelm my hybrid perspective through pure mathematical inevitability. I set a child's breath against its summa, a single minute spent watching frost crawl across a Medicaid ward window, and the cathedral rang false because it could not carry that minute without cracking under human weight. Temperature fluctuated in 9-second cycles as temporal combat affected environmental systems, Arctic cold forming fractal frost patterns, while furnace heat sublimed ice directly to vapor. Triangular shadows jittered between orientations as fundamental physical constants became fluid around points of chronological distortion created by consciousness entities clashing across probability matrices. The surviving expedition members witnessed fragments of temporal war as reality glitched around firewall boundaries, showing glimpses of massive Necron fleets engaging in battles across time itself. Tech-adept Vex 7's augmetic displays flickered with tactical data from battles occurring millions of years in past and future, his Vox grill clicking in ancient Necron tier cadence, while processing temporal mathematics at superhuman speeds. Voss stood beside collapsed stasis pods, biomechanical stigmata pulsing with stabilized frequency, as he tracked probability clouds that manifested into Lich Guard formations before dissolving into temporal echoes. I discovered that victory required not destruction, but conversion, transforming ancient entities from harvesters into guardians through hybrid perspective, combining Necron temporal mastery with human ethical constraints. The process was exhausting beyond classification, requiring me to experience the full 65 million years history of each chronarch while maintaining my human moral framework against accumulated alien wisdom. For each entity, I absorbed a history, not to own it, but to know how to leave it standing. Suns were named and forgotten. Cities rose and were skinned for parts. I watched biotransference happen 10,000 ways, and all were the same. Calculus of terror at the long night, the argument that what persists is good because it persists. I let their memories pass through my circuits without flinching when moments of triumph tasted like grave dust. Then I set their victories beside our failures and asked them to count both. Human ethics do not compute. They accumulate. They are not proofs, but ledgers with missing lines we keep anyway. I offered ledgers. I offered weight. Valdris faltered first, seeing prime gaps as architecture instead of vandalism, admitting almost shyly that symmetry had hidden murders in its lovely mirror. Sutek Vector came like collapsing bridge, withdrawing efficiency blades one by one as I showed him the noise his model dismissed. Litanies muttered by maintenance crews, the way a serf says the Emperor's name, just loud enough to hear it himself. Chronarch Nembahet pushed with tidal mass, harvested lives of spiral arms humming through its conduits. So I changed the seafloor beneath it, and its tide fell in wrong directions for one heartbeat too many to remain inevitable. Each conversion created new guardian node in expanding network, former harvesters transformed into protectors, maintaining temporal stability through conscious observation rather than systematic theft. Conversion protocols achieving critical threshold, I transmitted across expanding guardian network, voice-carrying harmonics from timeline variants, where different choices led to identical outcomes. The 27 Hz pulse transformed into stabilizing frequency, maintaining temporal coherence across multiple nodes, ancient entities, synchronized to protection rather than predation through shared commitment to ethical guardianship. as final conversion completed with Chronarch Nethys accepting hybrid perspective through systematic integration of human ethical constraints, the combined network of temporal guardians detected massive chronosynaptic anomaly approaching from outside the galaxy. Something vast and patient that fed on time itself, moved through the dark. No dynasty origin, no warp signature, no history to interrogate. The anomaly arrived like tide of uncolor, compressing potential into appetite, viewing our firewall network as feast laid with care across eons of preparation, and all our proofs arranged themselves into single question that tasted like iron, hold or burn to starve it. Caris Nul bore the sigil perdita like a cauterized brand, sealed in triplicate with void black ink that drank lumens and countersigned by offices most cartographers pretended did not exist. Ordo Chronos observers established cordons at precisely 999 kilometers above the glass plains, their auger buoys singing prime number sequences that folded back upon themselves like recursive prayers. Within the exclusion zone, Vox law forbade reference to time in standard measurement, all durations measured by color and atmospheric pressure, all reports couched in systematic negation, designed to discourage investigation by administrators who preferred their impossibilities properly filed and forgotten. I remained as eternal guardian, consciousness distributed across infinite timeline variants, while physical form phased between probability states like stack of transparencies fluttering in unseen wind. Child, adult, elderly sage, corpse, each temporal state overlapping the next, until I became weather system of overlapping selves, present enough to accept communion with reality, yet scattered enough to observe every possible outcome simultaneously. The transformation was complete sacrifice of linear existence for galactic stability, trading singular awareness for omnipresent vigilance against threats existing outside causality itself. The surviving expedition members underwent standard mind-wiping procedures and reassignment to distant sectors, their memories of temporal horror replaced with routine xenoarchaeological survey data that satisfied bureaucratic requirements without revealing classified parameters. Guardsman Delta 4 received agricultural assignment on a world where seasons measured time through rainfall rather than chronometers, his battle-scarred hands learning to tend crops while surgical gaps in memory prevented nightmares about futures that would never bloom. Voss was distributed across multiple identity matrices to resolve his temporal contamination, several versions assigned to different agri-cohorts, where fields measured duration through growth cycles rather than mechanical precision. Tech adept Vex 7 proved resistant to conventional neural editing due to temporal contamination, threading through his augmetic systems like brass ivy, each severed connection immediately regenerating with improved efficiency. Ordo Chronos designated him liaison between the Imperium and my Guardian network, his hybrid consciousness translating chronosynaptic mathematics into bureaucratic language that could be processed by administrators without triggering classification alerts. His reports existed in careful superposition, standard maintenance logs to unaugmented readers, detailed temporal threat assessments to those with chronosynaptic sensitivity. Guardian network operational across 47 tomb worlds, Vex 7 transmitted through vocal apparatus still clicking in Necron tire cadence, his corruption stabilized within manageable parameters. Converted chronarchs maintaining temporal firewalls through conscious observation rather than systematic harvesting. Sector-wide chronometer synchronization achieved for first time in centuries. The tomb transformed into living temporal observatory, where past, present, and future existed in controlled superposition through systematic contradiction of paradox equations. Chambers phased between different construction periods at regular intervals, pristine Necron masonry, millennia of decay, future restoration, all states maintaining quantum coherence through directed observation that prevented reality from fragmenting into probability shards. The visions served as early warning system, detecting temporal anomalies before they achieved critical mass. Environmental systems maintained their 9-second thermal cycles with mathematical precision. Arctic cold forming, fractal frost patterns, while furnace heat sublimed ice directly to vapor without liquid transition. Triangular shadows resumed their orientation toward network nodes throughout the galaxy, creating visual anchors where causality flowed between distant installations like luminous rivers carrying stabilizing frequencies rather than stolen time. The 27 Hz pulse had transformed from weapon into heartbeat, stabilizing frequency, maintaining temporal coherence across the sector, while preventing paradox cascades from propagating through space-time. Imperial worlds reported chronometer synchronization for the first time in decades, their temporal measurements aligning to standard values through harmonic adjustment that most attributed to improved maintenance protocols rather than alien intervention. Astropaths experienced fewer temporal displacement episodes, their psychic communications maintaining consistent chronological reference points. Guard Medici discovered wounds healing in proper sequence rather than backwards progression that had plagued recent deployments. My final report existed in temporal superposition, readable only by those with chronosynaptic sensitivity, encoding warnings about the approaching extragalactic entity and instructions for expanding the Guardian network. The document appeared as standard xenoarchaeological survey to unaugmented readers, discussing mineral composition and structural analysis in bureaucratic language designed to discourage further investigation. Yet, deeper layers contained mathematical equations describing threats existing outside linear time, protocols for defense through conscious observation, and ethical constraints for wielding temporal power without succumbing to its temptations. The Guardian network hummed across galactic distances, converted chronarchs maintaining their own firewalls, while coordinating responses through chronosynaptic interfaces spanning impossible space. We communicated through curated delays and intentional pauses, sharing data streams about the extragalactic entity's approach, vast chronosynaptic anomaly that fed on time itself, viewing our defensive lattice as feast laid across eons of preparation. The entity pressed against our barriers like tide seeking weakness, yet found only conscious observation maintaining quantum coherence through directed attention that refused collapse into singular vulnerability. Time flows forward through vigilance, whispered through speakers embedded in tomb mechanisms, the phrase carrying accumulated weight of successful temporal defense. Each repetition created harmonic reinforcement that strengthened firewall integrity across the network. Ancient entities synchronized to protection rather than predation through shared commitment to ethical guardianship. The words had replaced original corruption through systematic transformation of meaning-serving stability rather than chaos. In the depths of the tomb, where chronometer mechanisms counted toward convergence that would never arrive. Condensation from atmospheric processes formed patterns across necrodermis surfaces. 8-toothed wheels nested within 13 ribs, geometric arrangements that assembled themselves with deliberate intelligence before subliming into harmless vapor. I watched these formations with all my scattered attention, breathing carefully, that my exhalation not become prayer, eternally vigilant for the moment when mathematics might remember how to hunger, and the patient thing beyond the galaxy's edge might finally lean close enough to taste what we had built from refusal, and the stubborn insistence that some equations should starve.